A few years ago, I was renting a house in Northern California. The neighborhood was just outside the suburbs. It seemed like the perfect balance of having space and having nice neighbors, close enough to not feel isolated. The area had no streetlights though, so it was very dark at night, especially if there were clouds blocking out the moonlight. This didn't really bother me though. Actually, it made my house feel even more quaint on dark nights. I got home from work one day in midwinter. It was a very cloudy night, so pulling up to my house, I saw only what my headlights and front porch light illuminated. When I got out of my car though, I immediately caught a whiff of cigarette smoke. That was very odd, as I had never smelled that before around the house. I didn't see anyone nearby though, so I ignored that smell and went inside. I had just gotten off a shift with a few hours of overtime, so I was extremely tired. Even though it wasn't even 7 o'clock yet, I decided to take a shower and call it a night right away. I was abruptly woken sometime later, sure that I had just heard a noise inside my house. I wasn't worried right away because my friend would sometimes stop by to use my shower after work. On his way to his night classes, I had even given him a spare key so he could stop by if I wasn't home. He would always text to let me know beforehand though, and I had never heard my phone go off. I reached over to my bedside table and picked up my cell phone to see if my friend had sent me a text and maybe I'd just missed it or something. The bright light from my phone's screen and number pad blinded me. These were the days before phones had a light sensor that would dim the screen in the dark. This particular phone was so bright I could even use it as a flashlight by itself. Through squinted eyes, I could make out that it was around 9-something, but I couldn't really tell yet if I had an unread text or not. I set my phone aside and called out my friend's name. There were a couple of seconds of silence before I heard loud footfalls as someone started sprinting through the bottom floor of my house. I leapt out of bed by instinct and ran over to the closet. They were already up the stairs by the time I had opened the door and stepped inside. That house had 3 rooms upstairs, 2 bedrooms on either side of the hallway, the one I was in and a spare, and a bathroom at the end. The bedroom doors were both closed, but the bathroom door was cracked open. I heard whoever was in my house thunder down the hallway, right past my door and into the bathroom. Thank God he did that. That gave me just enough time to open the attic access in the ceiling of my closet and hoist myself up. I had just started to lift myself when the person ran back out of the bathroom. My feet were just barely inside the attic when my bedroom door burst open. I heard footsteps run into my room and stop. When they didn't see me in that room, they ran back out into the hallway and into the other room, which just had stacked boxes in a corner, some weights, and a table where I painted my miniature models. I guess they decided that if someone were hiding, it would be in the bedroom, because they charged back into my room and turned on the light. A moment later, the closet door was ripped open. I was crouched in my attic, just a foot or so away from the access, so I could try to stop them if they started to climb up. From my vantage point, all I could see was from about their knees down. They were wearing dirty blue jeans with frayed cuffs and worn work boots. After a few seconds of looking in the closet, they stepped away, and I heard a loud crash coming from my room, followed by screams of frustration and anger. That scream was the most unnerving part of the incident for me. It reminded me far too much of my stepfather, who would scream in a similar way when he lost his temper. He would eventually be put in a mental hospital for several mental disorders that resulted in erratic and violent tendencies. The man in my house ran back down the stairs. I could hear the crashes and clatters of random things as they were thrown around, and furniture was knocked all over the place. I stayed crouched there in the attic. I had left my cell phone down there when I ran for the closet, and I wasn't certain I could climb down without him hearing me. After some time, the noises finally stopped. I started counting very slowly. When I reached 1,000, I decided it was safe enough to climb down and call the police. The first thing I noticed when I exited the closet was that the intruder had flipped my bed completely over, I assume in an attempt to find me. That was the loud noise I had heard after he stepped away from the closet. I couldn't find my cell phone anywhere, so I went to the landline by the bed and called the cops. I waited in my room until I heard them call out from downstairs. The first floor was a complete mess, but I had expected that. Chairs had been knocked over, the sofa had been flipped. All the books, pictures, and knickknacks I had on my shelves were strewn across the floor. The cupboards in the kitchen had been opened, and all the boxed and canned foods had been thrown to the ground. As far as I could tell, though, the only thing missing was a single knife out of the wooden block in my kitchen. The police checked the house from top to bottom. They found that the side door had been forced open by something like a crowbar. They also found a few cigarette butts along my fence line, along with some foil and an empty pen tube, which the police said people often use to smoke meth, so they think he had been watching my house for a long while. I realized that he must have been out there smoking a cigarette when I got home. They collected up the evidence and told me I should stay with family or friends that night and get the door fixed as soon as possible. I opted to just not sleep. I moved a shelf over to block the broken door and spent the next couple hours cleaning things up. I would often go to the window with a flashlight and shine it along the fence line where the police found the cigarette butts and foil, but I didn't see anything. The next day, I called to have the door fixed and the motion lights installed at the back and sides of my house. I ran a phone cable up into the attic as well and added a landline there. I never wanted to be stuck up there without a phone again. Nothing else really happened in that house though. I lived there another 3 years without any more incident. One more precaution I took though was practicing getting out of my bed, going to my closet, and climbing into the attic as quietly and quickly as possible. I even kept at this when I moved, except now I would go into a crawl space at the back of the closet instead of the attic. I try not to think about what would have happened had I been just a bit slower getting to the attic, or if he hadn't gone into the bathroom at the end of the hall first. When I was in 8th grade, my parents separated. Basically, my mom packed her and I up one night and we moved into my grandpa's and never looked back. We ended up living there through my high school years when he died. My parents officially got divorced, my mom remarried, and we moved into the city with my stepfather. My grandpa lived on the first floor of the apartment, and the owners, an elderly couple who were family to us through marriage, lived on the second floor. The property also had a small in-law cottage out in the back where my uncle lived. For some reason that I will never understand, there was no lock to get into the actual building if you entered through the back. The back door opened into a landing where there was a locked and dead-bolted door to our apartment, and then 2 sets of stairs. One led up to the locked and also dead-bolted door of the second-floor apartment, and the other led down to the basement, where there was also no lock. Our apartment could also be entered from the front of the building, but in order to access the second-floor apartment or the basement, you had to go through this landing. The basement was actually pretty nice, and at one point they had even started to convert it into its own apartment before they ultimately decided to make the in-law cottage instead. So, in the basement there was a full kitchen, complete with an oven, sink, and refrigerator. The washer and dryer, which was shared by all of us, was also there in that basement as well. There was also just some general storage stuff lying around too. The basement was entirely open, except for a back room that was full of storage. It had one of those swinging saloon-type doors where you could see above and beneath them. The storage area was longer than it was deep, so you couldn't really see anything much behind the door aside from shelves. You had to walk into the room and turn to really see the rest of it. One night when I was in high school, I think I was around 15 or so at the time, after taking a shower, I saw that the laundry bin in the bathroom was pretty full, so I grabbed a ton of laundry and headed down towards that basement. It was pretty late at night, but I figured I would at least get it started and move some things over in the morning. I tossed everything onto the ground and started sorting out the colors from the whites when I got hit with this horrible feeling in my gut. This basement was not at all a creepy basement. It was well lit and pretty welcoming with the kitchen and everything. but for some reason I couldn't quite explain. Something felt really wrong. Anyone who's ever been hit with the feeling that they were being watched knows exactly what I'm talking about. I don't know how or why it came over me, but it was a feeling I just couldn't shake. I found myself looking over to the saloon doors, the only part of the basement I could not see in its entirety. I don't know why, maybe just to assure myself I was being a big baby. I started to walk towards the back room. I managed to stop myself just as I reached out towards those swinging doors. I've been a horror fan as long as I can remember, and had seen more horror movies than I could even count. I knew that if this was a movie, I would be calling myself a dumbass and saying not to go into that back room. I quickly snapped my hand back and ran up the stairs, leaving all the clothes behind. I ran into our apartment where I locked the doors and immediately told my mom that I just had the worst feeling in the basement and I was super creeped out. Despite me not being the type of person that scares easily, she basically rolled her eyes at me and told me to go to bed. I ended up doing as I was told, though it took me a bit to shake the feeling and finally fall asleep. Later that night, my bladder woke me up and I stumbled out of my room to go to the bathroom. I didn't turn any of the lights on as I started making my way towards the bathroom because it usually woke up my grandpa and I didn't want to bother him. As I got closer though, I noticed my mom standing in the doorway of her bedroom. Something looked off, and it took me a moment to realize that she was clutching the phone. She then noticed me and whispered to me to get against the wall, which I did without hesitation. It took a few moments for the grogginess to wear off, and my eyes to adjust to the darkness before I could see what she did. My mom's bedroom was immediately off the kitchen. The kitchen was where the back door that led to the landing and basement was located. The door had a tiny window up top with a small but thick curtain. It was thin enough that you could see that someone was outside the door, but thick enough to not be able to make out any features of the person on the other side. There was someone on the other side of the door, and every now and then the doorknob would turn gently. You could hear the scratching sound on the other side too. I had never been so afraid in my entire life. I'm not sure how I managed to do what I did next. It was like someone else had taken control over me entirely. I slid down against the wall that I was clinging to and started to crawl against it in the darkness toward the kitchen. My mom looked petrified, watching back and forth between me and the back door. She kept whispering for me to stop and go back, but I kept moving forward, low and against the wall, toward the counter where I carefully grabbed a butcher knife. I was shaking the whole time I moved with the knife in my hand on the ground next to the fridge, which was next to the door the man was trying to get into. I had this horrible feeling I was going to be killed, but if I wasn't going to go down without a fight. I sat there forever in the darkness next to the door, with my mom hiding in the bedroom doorway across from me, just waiting. It was only for a few minutes. My mom had already called 911 before I had woken up and stumbled my way toward the bathroom. The lights from the approaching squad cars soon filled the kitchen, and from the other side of the door I could hear a sudden clamoring and commotion. The slam of the back screen bursting open as the would-be assailant took off sprinting into the night. It was around 3 a.m. when this happened, so it was completely dark outside. We lived right by some train tracks and very thick bushes and trees too, that made it very easy for the man to escape the cop that pursued him. The police came in and took statements from my mom and I. My grandpa, who was partially deaf, had managed to sleep through almost the entire thing until the police came through to search the apartment and make sure we were okay. The outside of the door and doorknob were both covered in deep scratches, like someone had been going at it with a knife trying to figure out how to get in. But that wasn't the most horrifying part to me. That was reserved for the basement. The clothes that I had brought down were not where I had left them, and had been thrown about and disheveled. The back room, the one with the swinging door that I had stopped myself from going into. The boxes that were out of view had also been thrown about, all opened, obviously gone through with some things missing. There were some wrappers from food on the floor too. He had been down there looking for something to steal. He was down there when I went down to do laundry. I had almost walked into that room on my own, and based on what we had seen on the door, he had a knife with him too. To this day, I can't help but find myself sometimes thinking about what may have happened if I had walked into that room that day. This happened back while I was in college a couple of years ago. Me and my roommate moved into a beautiful apartment our junior year of college. Our parents made it extremely clear that two small females living alone together was not ideal for some of the cheaper, shady neighborhoods close to our college. We attended a college in our state capital, so we were in a city environment. They had certain criteria we had to meet in order for us to live there, and for them to co-sign our leases. Lit sidewalks, keyed entry into the building, lit parking lot, X blocks from campus, etc., etc. Eventually, we finally found one that fit our parents' criteria. Our apartment building had a keyed entry for both the front of the building and the back gate that led to the fire escape. Our apartment was also an end unit that led to the fire escape, so there were 2 deadbolt locks on it. We loved this apartment. We felt safe, we had fun, we were truly living the college experience. And then my roommate's boyfriend started slowly moving his things into the apartment and staying there way more often than he should be. I finally told my roommate that if he wanted to stay here, use the water, electric, and food I helped pay for, then he needed to pay for it too, including our rent. I told her a 3-way split, where I'm paying only my rent and he can pay the entire electric, water, and trash bill. I thought I was being pretty fair, honestly, and even though her boyfriend didn't have a job, that was not my problem. I work and go to college. Your "I don't want to work at McDonald's" excuse was completely garbage. If you want a place to stay, then to the Golden Arches you shall go, buddy. Instead, my roommate started sneaking him in really late at night after I went to sleep, and he left on days I'd stay home. While I was in class, he was there. Then he would leave before I would come back. My schedule was extremely routine. Well, he can't have a key, so if my roommate is in class or at work, how is he getting in? He can't take my roommate's key because he decides to leave halfway through the day, so how would she get her key back? All good questions. The solution they came up with is to leave the back door unlocked that led to the fire escape. That way he could just jump the fence at the bottom of the fire escape to get back onto it when he was ready to come back, or stick a rock in between the door. Whatever worked for him, I guess. So I'm off of work and school one Thursday morning. I decide I'm going to sleep in as long as I possibly can. My roommate and her boyfriend had already left for the day, so naturally they left the door unlocked that day as well. I'm asleep like a pretty princess. It's about 10 in the morning when I hear the back door open to the apartment. I come to just enough to recognize the noise, realize it's probably my roommate or her boyfriend, and brush it off and try to drift back to sleep. All of a sudden, though, I start hearing someone creeping through the apartment through the wooden floors. It definitely didn't sound like casual, comfortable walking. It was clearly someone stepping slowly and quietly through my apartment. The door to my room was ajar just a sliver, but I didn't see anything out through it. I'm honestly too tired to get up and look. A couple of minutes passed by and I figured that my roommate and or her boyfriend were just being weirdos and I could safely fall back asleep. I can't be sure how much time passed before I opened my eyes again, but it couldn't have been too long. I wake up to the sight of my door slowly opening. My back is to the door and I'm facing the opposing wall. I slowly start to turn over to see why my roommate or her boyfriend would dare wake me up from my slumber, and there he is. A burglar, in my room next to the bed I'm currently laying in. A 6-foot-tall, 250-pound burglar, unplugging my TV 5 feet away from me. I immediately pretended I was just shifting positions in my sleep and continued to roll over with my eyes as shut as I could make them seem, still open enough to watch what was going on though. He heard me shuffling as I turned over, stopped, and looked dead at me. Luckily, he didn't seem to realize my eyes were open just a tiny bit. He goes back to unplugging my TV, my DVD player, and shoves it in a bag he's brought, like those bags from IKEA. He steals my change jar too, and casually starts walking out the front door of my apartment, like he just came in for a cup of fucking tea or something. After I hear the door shut, I immediately spring out of bed, grab my phone, and start dialing 911, all while locking the front and back doors. The dispatcher is trying to calm me down. At this point, I'm hysterical. I can't even catch my breath to tell her okay. Luckily, I told her my address before I started hyperventilating. Pause. I'll take a second to commend the police department, both city and college, because they were there in less than 3 minutes. Resume. She tells me the cops are there, but they need me to go downstairs to let them in the building because they don't have the key to the front door. I was so afraid to open the door to my apartment. I even looked down the hallway. I'm about to walk to the front door and extend my arm out to the handle when I hear, "Ma'am, it's the police." As if I didn't get scared enough already, they just yell through the door. I'm paranoid because the dispatcher just told me they couldn't get in and didn't realize someone probably let them in downstairs. I asked the dispatcher to confirm that the people at my door were actually police officers. Thankfully, she told me they were. Okay, cool. I open the front door and collapse right there. My legs just completely turn into jello and I hit the floor. I blacked out for a brief period of time, but they helped me up and sat me down on the couch. There was at least 10 officers in my apartment, from both the city and college departments. When I look outside the living room to the street below, too, there are 5 or 6 cop cars blocking the street. I was being bombarded with questions now. I had to try and find out what was missing beside the stuff from my room. I was crying, shaking. This is not at all how I saw my day off going. I tell them my roommate left the back door open for her boyfriend. They inspect the back door, blah blah blah. The next thing I know, my roommate and her boyfriend walk in, and they both had the most dumbfounded looks on both their faces. At this point, now there's a detective talking to me, and I'm giving my statement, giving a description of the burglar, the stuff missing, looking at mugshots. I immediately stop talking to this detective, look up at both of them, and blurt out, "Someone robbed us while I was asleep. He came into my room, you know." My roommate looked me dead in the face and said, "Oh God, is any of my stuff gone?" That's what you're asking me right now? If your replaceable shit is missing, what a bitch. The 2 officers take her and her boyfriend aside and talk to them while I'm finishing up with the detective. I call my then boyfriend and he comes over to help me pack my stuff up to stay over at his house for a couple of days, which turned into me staying until my lease at my place ended, around 4 months. After failing to recognize any of the suspects in the lineup, the cops slowly started leaving. After they all left, I called my parents to tell them what happened, gathered my things, and headed over to my boyfriend's house. My roommate and her boyfriend never once apologized, not for leaving the door unlocked, but just a general "I'm sorry this happened to you" type thing. They never asked me if I was okay, if I wanted to talk, nothing. The day my lease ended was the best day of that entire year. I couldn't wait to get away from my roommate, her boyfriend, in that apartment. They never found the guy who robbed me that day. I didn't even really care about the materialistic things. He robbed me of my safety and security, and it took a good amount of counseling to get that back. I'm also thankful he didn't try to attack me that morning. My friendship with my roommate was of course tarnished. I haven't spoken to her since. And to this day, I don't sleep with my back to the door, and I always keep a knife under my mattress. So this has been happening for about a year and a half now, and tonight something happened that finally made me and my boyfriend realize I wasn't just imagining it all. About a year and a half ago, after living in my apartment for over 5 years, I very suddenly started noticing that things would be out of place when I would get home from work. Things almost seemed to be out of place purposefully, as if to mess with my OCD specifically. I would sometimes notice knives that were put back in the knife block the wrong way, or little ornaments that I have around my house being turned to face a different direction. Sometimes my clothes would be hung up in the closet the wrong way too. Little things like that where I could feel something was off, but there was really no way to prove that it was. In all honesty, it could have just been me being absent-minded when putting things away. After a couple of months of things randomly being out of place though, and always having that creeped out feeling, things suddenly stopped going out of place. I put it into the back of my mind and stopped being so paranoid and tried to move on with my life. That is, until about 2 weeks ago. For the past couple of weeks, you see, my cat has been seriously trying to tell me something when I've gotten home from work. Any of you who have a cat will know that exact meow. It's not an "I'm hungry" or "I'm pissed because you've been at work all day" type of thing, but more like a "oh my god, you'll never believe what happened" type of thing, if that makes sense. I didn't really think anything of it though because, well, cats can be jerks sometimes. I assumed he was just bored and wanting to complain about something. The other day when I came home from work, I noticed a pair of balled-up socks that didn't belong to me sitting on my bedroom floor. My boyfriend came over the next night, and I told him he had left a pair of socks here when he stayed over on the weekend. He looked over at those socks and immediately said they were not his. My heart sunk, and so did his. We both knew that someone had been coming into my house again, and that I wasn't imagining it the first time. A few days later, I came home from work and found a bag from a lingerie store on top of my couch. It was empty. This bag had come from inside my house, as I had just bought a bathing suit from that store a couple of weeks prior, and the receipt was in the bag as well. At first, I thought my cat may have dragged it there, but upon inspecting, there were no teeth marks. As well, my cat couldn't have opened my closet door and gone into the paper and cardboard recycling that I kept up there on the top shelf. The final and most perhaps unsettling thing happened just tonight. My boyfriend met me after work, and we went out for dinner. We went back to my apartment after. I went to unlock my door when I noticed that it was already unlocked. Locking the door when I leave the house is one thing I am the most OCD about. I don't just double and triple check it, I quadruple check it, sometimes even more. It's not just a habit that I have, but something deeply ingrained into my being. Everyone who knows me knows this about me, as I even do it to their doors as well. I have to check 4 or more times or I get this very icky feeling. So because of this, my boyfriend was immediately on red alert when he noticed my door was unlocked. We entered my house, and I was checking to see if anything was out of place. He ran to the sliding glass door and tugged on it, and it opened right up. I never leave that door unlocked. He witnessed me lock it on Sunday when I closed the door because it was getting too cold. He saw me check it 4 times. I had not opened it since then. We're both convinced somebody has been in my house. Whoever has been coming in somehow must have a key. The fact they left the sliding door unlocked makes me think maybe they were coming back with ill intentions. If they have a key, why would they need to unlock the sliding door? Unless they don't want to be identified by the security cameras at the front door of the building. Either way, I have already ordered a security system, but unfortunately it's not going to arrive for a few days. Any suggestions on anything I can do in the meantime to keep safe? And what do you guys think? Am I just being paranoid, or should I go with my gut on this one?